I've made a serious and continuous lapse in my judgment, and I don't expect to be forgiven. I'm simply here to apologize. Earlier this year, I put Spider-Noir at the bottom of my most anticipated superhero project ranking. I had been burned by Sony far too many times and wasn't willing to trust the stacked creative team behind this show. I wrote it off thinking it could end up as another disaster, planning to expect disappointment so I'd never be disappointed. Which is why I am very happy to admit I was wrong, because this show rules. It blew away all my expectations and undoubtedly proved me wrong, so I'm here to apologize to Sony. I'm sorry for doubting you. Now that that's out of the way, I have to ask, why weren't we doing this the entire goddamn time? Why did you make me sit through Morbius, Craven, and Madam Web when we could have been getting inspired projects like this? Better late than never, I guess, but it shouldn't have taken 5 years and a failed universe for Sony to ask the question, what if we actually used Spider-Man and made it good? Hopefully they learn the right lesson from this show and give us more projects like this, because I thoroughly enjoyed every single aspect of Spider-Noir. Please go out of your way to watch it on Prime Video, because it's on there for some reason, and also MGM Plus, but that's a streaming service I only just learned existed and is definitely used for money laundering. Okay, now that I got all my bits out of the way, let me actually start reviewing this show. Spider-Noir is a beautifully stylized period piece exploring the weight of responsibility through a pulpy mystery, unraveling this tangled web of conspiracy with some genuinely shocking twists and turns. It's fun, campy, and unapologetically embraces every aspect of the noir genre. While the style is undoubtedly great and worth the watch for that alone, it's not just an aesthetic, as they use the set dressing to their advantage to tell a story that only works in a show like this. The pacing is a slow burn for sure, and you can definitely feel that at points, but it's worth the wait by the end when things start clicking into place with some genuinely clever writing. It's a fresh take on the Spidey mythos for live action, as they fuse these two genres together in something that stands apart from the rest and feels special. To put things simply, it's great. I love this show so much that I was willing to binge the entire thing in one day, because for some reason, Sony decided to make my job a little harder by dropping all 8 episodes at 3 AM, but the show was so good I didn't even mind the binge. A large part of that is due to Nic Cage's performance, because good god man, is he delivering in this series. Cage is by far one of the most intriguing working actors today for me, because no matter what the quality of the overall project is, I always know he's going to give a very interesting performance, and that alone makes the series worth watching. But what's great about Spider-Noir is that he's not just doing Nic Cage again. He's not playing a caricature of himself or anything like that. There is so much more he brings to this performance that makes it one of his best in years, I think. Don't get me wrong, he's still doing what he's best at and playing a freak, but he's able to put more of himself and humanity into the character of Ben Reilly. He fully commits to this. Everything from the inflection in his voice to every little mannerism transforms him into the character. There is so much detail and thought into the way he moves and the expressions he gives reacting to things on screen, but there's also a deep sadness to the way he plays this character that I think adds a lot and sells the utter state Ben is in when we pick up with him in this series. On top of all that though, he can also feel like a cartoon character come to life, but it's never done in a distracting way that feels unrealistic. When you're doing a campy throwback series like this, those exaggerated movements just feel in line with the overall tone the show is going for, and it is truly spectacular. Even down to the little ticks in his performance that feel oh so very Spider-like. It's a very big performance and a bold swing, but I think he hits it out of the park. Especially when he's able to go undercover and really ham it up, it is so entertaining to watch him just burst into a room and control the energy, tricking people with all this misdirection as he plays an even bigger, more exaggerated version of himself, which is already turned up to 11. It is so great. Cage himself described this performance as 70% Humphrey Bogart and 30% Bugs Bunny, and it is way better than I could ever put it. That is exactly the medium he strikes, and it gives us a really compelling performance to watch on screen. There's nothing I say that's going to do this performance justice. You just have to watch it for yourself and see Nic at his most Cage while bringing a whole new layer of vulnerability to the character. He does a really good job maintaining that balance and hits the sweet spot to deliver a genuinely great performance. And then he also does this kind of exaggerated transatlantic accent like this on top of it all. It's a real throwback to what you'd hear from a 1930s gumshoe in a very overstated way that might seem silly to some, but was very endearing to me. I might just do the rest of the video talking like this, honestly. It's kind of fun to do, but sorry. I don't think any of you want that. There's one specific part of his performance I want to shout out real quick, which is how he portrays the spider sense. I love the way it's presented as this precognitive headache he gets when he's able to sense something bad is going to happen. It's a very interesting take I've never seen before to show the sense as if it's something that actively hurts him, and he does a great job bringing that idea to life, especially with how it ties into the overall overall themes of this show, as Ben doesn't really want to be Spider-Man anymore. My biggest concern going into this show was that they were going to surf Dracula him being Spider-Man, as they had him retire at the start of the show only for him to finally suit up in the closing moments of it. But thankfully, the opening episode of the series does a great job easing those concerns and showing that he's going to be the Spider throughout the entire season, as he starts out that way but very quickly gets back into the swing of things. Ben being retired is more so just a framing device to question if the Spider needs to exist in general rather than a way for them to get around him being the Spider at all. And honestly, I think that really works, as I love his characterization in this show. They make him suffer as this sad, broken drunk drifting through life as a PI after he lost the love of his life, and that is peak characterization. You know me. I love anytime a Spider-Man is suffering, and this show is basically him being psychologically tortured for 8 episodes straight. The big benefit of starting this narrative out in a position where Ben doesn't want to be the Spider anymore, you now feel the weight of that suit every time he puts it on, for better or for worse, as it means something for him to become the Spider and go out of his comfort zone once again to help people when it's needed. I really like the idea that despite what Ben might tell you, deep down he is very much so a good guy. You see him doing all of these good things throughout the show, like giving people the pictures for free or not charging someone for a case. Even if he has become jaded by the world and losing a loved one, he's not able to look the other way and is still a good person. But on top of all that, they allow him to be incredibly flawed. He's allowed to be selfish and bitter and kind of a dick at times. And that is exactly what I want to see in a character like this. He's not just one thing. He's a complex person with real human emotions that doesn't always act the right way. With Ben returning as the Spider in the beginning of this series, we're able to see both the pros and the cons of him coming back, as he's able to help people, but also inadvertently cause more problems while being the Spider. With that, it creates a very tricky question for him to answer over the course of the series on if his actions are having a net positive impact on the city or not. We're able to explore really interesting themes like questioning the role and responsibility in a very effective way through this story. That is by far my favorite thing about the narrative of this show, as they toy with the idea of, with great power there must also come great responsibility, in a really refreshing way, as we get to see that idea tested against a cruel world that rewards irresponsibility. Those themes become even more interesting though when a cure is introduced and Ben is able to put his money where his mouth is and potentially take it, as he's able to put his life as the Spider behind him once and for all. With big ideas like that, this show does a really good job embracing the themes of responsibility when it comes to Spider-Man storytelling and showing us how he deals with this in a completely new light, as Ben is basically figuring out how to be a hero again and learn what the Spider actually represents. It's some very powerful stuff that is directly shown to us rather than told through his actions and the way the narrative unfolds, which results in a satisfying conclusion. Especially when it came to his action scenes in the show, because that really surprised me. While you can definitely feel the restraint of the budget in some scenes, mostly when it comes to stuff like the web swinging, they make every single dollar count and give us some really visceral action. What's great about Noir compared to other versions of Spider-Man is that he is a completely different fighting style from the rest. While your classic takes on Spider-Man are going to be more agile, flipping around the screen in the most dynamic way possible, Nic Cage can't really do that because he's like 60 years old. But more importantly, it doesn't fit this tone for the universe and would feel very out of place. So instead we get to see him moving around as a brawler, and that looks great. He's throwing mean right hooks and not afraid to get his hands dirty, giving us some really creative action scenes where you feel every punch. It's raw, in your face, and brutal, and I love it. Especially with the way they blend his webs into his fighting style. It feels like such a practical use for his powers and looks really cool on screen. There's one sequence in particular where Noir has a drunken one-take fight scene, and it is by far the best action sequence in this entire show in my opinion. Just seeing him stumble his way through a bar fight he started, trying to hold his own, all the while they're shooting this in a really exciting way. All around, really great action in this show, as every single fight scene feels so fun and lively. And I have to say, he is looking so good while doing it because this costume is flawless. I have no notes. It is a perfect suit. Oh god, it feels weird to see color again. It's entirely practical and works with the time period they're in, along with some really great details that make it feel like a Spider-Man costume. My favorite thing about it though is by far the glowing eyes. That looks incredible every time it lights up the screen. And he found a way to make the fedora look cool again. Bonus points for that. This is probably a top 3 live-action Spider-Man costume. It's very important that this character looks as cool as possible, so I'm glad they nailed that, especially with all of the secret identity drama going on in this series. The way this season plays around with the Spider's identity as it becomes a focal plot point of the season, especially in the back half, is a ton of fun. All of these different characters trying to figure out who he is for very different reasons until it escalates in the finale, giving us a really tense scene when Nic Cage has to be on the phone with the Spider and prove he's not him. I'm so glad they run with the idea and we get to see it to its fullest extent. Also, on him being called the Spider, it did feel a little weird at first, but I think it works for this adaptation because it feels like something that came right out of a 1930s pulp radio show and fits the time. It's not just a change for the sake of it, even though I'm pretty sure there's a very real legal reason for why they couldn't call him Spider-Man considering how insane those Sony laws are. It's why I also don't mind him being called Ben Reilly rather than Peter Parker, if you'll just allow me to keep going further on this tangent, because I'm pretty sure with the way the Sony Marvel rights deal works out, they can't call him Peter Parker and let him do these things like drink alcohol and get drunk on screen, and they do reference the fact that he did change his name in universe, so that's a pretty solid workaround that makes sense. Fun fact, did you know in the leaked 2011 contract between Sony and Marvel, Peter Parker is allowed to sell crack in the symbiote suit, but he's not allowed to kiss a guy? That's crazy. I know Johnny Storm is fuming right now. That's enough of me talking about all the character stuff for now, though. Let's talk about what really matters, the aesthetic. At the time of recording, I have only seen this season one time, and I watched the entirety of it through the authentic black and white version. And you know what, I have to say it. If your first watch isn't in black and white, I think less of you as a person. Okay, that was maybe a little too far, but I'm gonna look at you differently. Don't get me wrong, it does look really good in color. I've watched a few episodes back in the colored version and was blown away by some of the vibrant colors they have on screen that were hidden away through the black and white cut. There are so many different interesting decisions made in the costume design and the set dressing that pop on screen and look dazzling under all that lighting. Honestly, the true hue version alone is better than 90% of all superhero projects just because of how interesting it is to look at. These Technicolor visuals are groundbreaking for the genre and hypnotizing to look at. I came into this expecting to not like the color version very much, but man, they blew me away with these visuals. I would say that both versions are absolutely as good as each other, which is the highest praise I can give them. Every single comic book adaptation should strive to look at least this good and inventive. I'm not too proud to admit that I think the colored version is more exciting to look at, but with all of that being said, the black and white version is just too gorgeous to look away from, man. Come on, look at shots like this and tell me that isn't one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen in your life. If you haven't done it, I strongly encourage you to watch this show through the black and white version exclusively, because when you're not focusing on all the colors, there's so many different details you pick up on, and it feels like a more rewarding experience. Only then, once you've done that, are you allowed to watch the show for a second time to appreciate it in color. And hopefully that way it'll guarantee us a second season. But for the more important black and white version, the level of contrast really makes things stand out on screen and separate the black and white from each other in a non-problematic way. That's so stupid. The level of contrast they use really makes things stand out on screen as they play around with the lightest of whites and the darkest of shadows to set the mood and guide your attention. It's really creative filmmaking that looks great on screen and something you're not going to get out of the colored experience. Especially because they are forced to use interesting staging to make up for the lack of color, which results in a show with great camera work. You get shots like this or this, which feel much more intentional than just putting down the camera and filming, because they gotta find new, inventive ways to keep your attention as the viewer. If you'll allow me to get a little pretentious for a second and flex the 2 film classes I took in college, the mise-en-scène and shot composition for this series is so dynamic and frames it like a painting for every single scene. I cannot stress enough just how good this show looks, and a large reason for that is the lighting. When you're shooting for black and white, lighting is the most powerful tool to make the black and white visuals look as interesting as possible, playing around with that contrast and highlighting things in the scene. The best thing about the lighting in this show, though, is how they're effectively painting with rays of light in these really exciting ways to make shots feel alive. Whether it be how light flows in through a window to light a specific character in the scene, or how stage lights in the background are used to frame a character against the backdrop. It all looks so gorgeous and demonstrates an extra level of love and care you don't often see in other superhero shows because they have to rely on creative lighting to make the show look as good as it does. It's a very large reason as to why Spider-Noir works so well as a show, because they're working within the constraints of the time period and the aesthetic they're going for, forcing them to get creative. It's that kind of inspiration we need more of in the genre, and I hope Spider-Noir sets a great example for the future of not just Sony projects, because God knows they need one, but for the rest of the genre as a whole. Especially when it comes to the level of immersion they're able to achieve with this set design. It almost feels like you are legit watching something from the 30s, just, with better quality in pretty much every regard. The set design of this series is able to strike a perfect balance between nuanced details to make paying attention worth your time, and a beautiful simplicity that comes with an era like the 30s. Every single shot is so rich to look at, with so many different layers to focus focus on in the background, as they put in the effort to make this feel like a true lived-in world and not just a set recreating the 30s. Ben's office is a really great example of that authenticity, as the place looks like an actual office would from the 30s, with so many different little details there that brings the entire thing together. This show just simply has the sauce, as it presents a really fun and dynamic visual style. From the gorgeous cinematography to the way it's edited, it's basically like if somebody made an old noir detective story with today's technology. And it wouldn't be complete without talking about that score, because it is great. I can't believe it's taken me this long to talk about it. It's got a real jazzy vibe to it that fits this time period and evokes a sense of awe and wonder. The unpredictability of this smoky jazz they set the mystery to does a really good job setting the mood and making you feel like you're on that case with Ben, exploring the world through his eyes. I cannot say enough good things about it. I cannot wait to listen to that when they finally drop it, but until then, I'm just going to be listening to that banger intro song because it's been stuck in my head for the last 2 days and I wouldn't have it any other way. They did not have to go so hard with that intro, getting an original song made for the series, but I am so glad they did because it fits the tone of this show so well and was never skipped by me. I don't know how I'm going to explain to people that my #1 song on my Spotify Wrapped was the Spider-Noir theme song, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Then again, last year was Fantastic Four, so what else is new? Oh yeah, and while talking about the tone, I think it's really important to mention that Spider-Noir does a really good job bringing the noir tone to life. They fully embrace that hard-boiled crime story and all the pessimistic undertones that come with it, but I think the most impressive part about the whole show is how they recreate that fast-talking dialogue you'd see in the 30s. There's a very snappy back and forth between these characters as they're casually cracking wise and dropping these rapid-fire quips. It feels so in line with what you're seeing during that time period, and I have to give a massive credit to all the actors who were able to pull that off so seamlessly. But more importantly, in the sense that they play the entire thing completely earnestly. They're not trying to make a joke out of this genre and going all out to replicate it to their best possible abilities in a really respectful way. And I think they do a great job achieving that, giving the show a very serious tone with important hits of levity that feel accurate to the time period. The dry humor in this show is so good. I was not expecting it to be so funny. One of my absolute favorite things about a period piece is that they can't rely on reference humor to make jokes. And thank God for that, because it forces the writers to get crafty and come up with creative jokes that fit the time period, and Noir exceeds at that. I swear, there were several moments where I actively LOL'd. Yeah, it felt wrong when I said LOL too. There were several moments when I actively laughed out loud. That's so much better. It's a very witty show that embraces the camp and is easily one of its strong suits. Oh god, I just realized we're like 15 minutes into the video and I haven't talked about the mystery yet. That seems important. Trying to boil down this whole thing is hard, but the general idea of the show is that a mystery person hired a powered person to try and kill Silvermane, but the attempt failed. In spite of that, it shook the status quo of New York City and put everybody on edge, roping Ben in to solve it from a few different unexpected angles. Admittedly, it does take a few episodes to really get going, but once it does, I am fully on board. Thankfully, the vibes in the meantime are immaculate, and I love just spending time in this universe watching it operate, but there's a very specific turning point where this show goes from good to great about halfway through once all the pieces come together, and that's when I sat up in my seat and locked in, immediately turning on the next episode because I needed to see what happened next. That's how good the show gets once you let the slow burn play out. It was well worth all the time they took setting up these moments, as the payoff is even more impactful because of it. I am happy to sit through a few slower episodes if it means it picks up like this in the back half, which I absolutely believe it does. They do a really good job weaving this complicated web of a mystery filled with decoys and subversions that keep you guessing as you try and figure out what's going on in the larger grand scheme of this universe, as it slowly spirals out of control from an assassination attempt on just one person to the mayor's involvement and how far this really goes, and then this mystery takes an even bigger twist after that, bringing so many different villains into this conspiracy as it takes a really interesting turn. And I love the unexpected turns this show takes into body horror as Ben tries to figure out what's going on in the deep dark corners of the universe. I really didn't think they'd go as far as they did in some sequences, but they caught me completely by surprise and genuinely got to me. There's some stuff with Man-Spider in this that is so disgusting to look at, I want it out of my head immediately.
This is a pretty hardcore origin story.
The fact that we have a Nic Cage Spider-Man body horror show is the stuff of dreams. I cannot believe we are so lucky that something like that exists and is as good as it is. But here's the thing. I would say that if I had one major complaint with Spider-Noir, it's the fact that despite this show taking place in the 30s, it doesn't really engage with the themes of the time as much as I would have liked it to, especially knowing what these Spider-Noir comics are about. It feels like a missed opportunity. That's not to say the time period isn't involved in this overarching mystery, because I think it's really interesting how war shapes the narrative and these characters are dealing with the consequences of that. That stuff is great, but I would have appreciated Noir engaging more with the themes of the era. It's something I think the Noir comics handle really well, as there's a lot of commentary on the rise of socialism in those books and how that is directly tied to Spider-Noir's character, but we don't get much of that in the show, which is weird considering this is like the height of Jim Crow laws with 2 prominent black characters in the cast, and they don't really explore that as much as they should have. There's definitely moments where that plays a role in the story, it's just a little more sanitized than you'd expect. While the show is great in its own right, as it stands right now, Noir isn't the best adaptation of the comics if they're going to ignore those themes so instrumental in that character. It doesn't make the show bad because that stuff wasn't included in a bubble. I still think it really works and tells a compelling narrative from start to finish. It's just knowing that they could have done more, and I wish they were able to tell those stories and embrace this time period with open arms in every single aspect. If the show does get a second season, I hope we get more of that in the future as they can make this character more like his comic counterpart, the swinging socialist he is. But knowing that the show is produced by Amazon, I don't have the highest of hopes. But that's enough talking about what could have been better. Let's talk about something the show did really well, the supporting cast. Yeah, I know, there's other people in this show besides Ben Reilly, despite what I might lead you to believe considering we're almost 20 minutes into the video and I've only talked about him. But I promise you, this show has a great supporting cast where pretty much everybody feels fleshed out and interesting. By far, without a shadow of a doubt, the best member of the supporting cast is Kat Hardy, and I'm not just saying that because she's redefining how good a person can look on screen. I love the role she fills in this series as a mysterious femme fatale, constantly shaking things up. She's very clearly supposed to be this universe's take on the Black Cat, and I think it's a really interesting adaptation as they capture the heart of the character but handle her in a really fresh and exciting way. I really love the dynamic she has with Ben in the show. They've got a very fun and flirty rapport with each other, constantly going back and forth in this verbal dance it feels like every single time they talk. It is seriously so compelling seeing these two characters sit down in a room with each other and just talk because of the almost competitive nature of their conversations. It does a lot to instantly show off the chemistry these two have, as Kat basically gets caught in the middle of a love triangle between Ben and Flint Marko, the Sandman, and thus in doing so, she effectively becomes the center point of the entire series as everything revolves around her and the decisions she's making. And for a character so important to the core of this show, I'm very glad that she's as interesting as she is. They do a lot to make you sympathize with her and the position she's in working for Silvermane, but then also turn things on your head as they play around with her morality in an even more interesting way. You really can't help but to root for her anytime she's on screen, even when she's making bad decisions, you know that they're for the right reasons. And from the moment she's introduced on screen, there's this aura of mystique surrounding her that they play with over the course of the series, trying to figure out whose side she's really on. She's crafty, she's clever, and she's very much so her own person with her own unique motivations that are often directing where this series goes. And they still manage to do it in a way that you wouldn't expect. I cannot say enough good things about that character and Lee Jun Lee's performance. She is enchanting every time she's on screen. Another great addition to this cast is Robbie Robertson, played by Lamorne Morris, and let me tell you, he is an absolute delight every time he's on screen. Especially as a New Girl enjoyer, I loved seeing him. It also helps that he's there to be a balance with Ben's bleak outlook on life, providing a more optimistic perspective for the show. At the start of the series, Ben doesn't even think it's worth fighting corruption anymore because someone will always fill that vacuum, but Robbie is there to try and inspire him and remind him that somebody has to do it, as he comes from the world of journalism where these people need to be held accountable and he needs to have a story ready by 3 p.m. I really enjoyed the way his job as a reporter clashes with Ben's investigations as he's trying to put the truth out there while Ben might need it to stay on the down low to get ahead with his case. It often puts them at odds in a really interesting way as they both have the same goal and are working together, but they're trying to achieve very different outcomes. It's a very unique angle for conflict that has a great payoff in the back half of the show, and is a really efficient way to use these characters to their full extent, having them bounce off each other in a way that only makes both of them more interesting. But for as great as that is, I really like how Robbie is there to try and get Ben back on his feet. They have this very important conversation at one point where Ben doesn't think the Spider was a hero, and Robbie drops the line saying that, so what if he wasn't beforehand? There's still time for him to become one now, and that interaction did such a beautiful job boiling down what this entire season is about. Then there's Janet. Oh my god, I love Janet. She is an icon. Ben's secretary, Janet Ruiz, gets to play a surprisingly important role in this show, but it is so welcomed as she's there to basically hold Ben together and make sure he doesn't spiral out of control even more than usual. She's also there to constantly humble Ben, which is very needed with how much of a curmudgeon he can be. And because of that playful back and forth they have with each other, she is a genuine scene stealer. Especially when she's interacting with Robbie, I love their dynamic so much, as she's basically going on these little side quests investigating alongside him. It's great to see her get so much breathing room to be an investigator in her own right, proving her worth to Ben and that she can be more than just a secretary, as he's usually off doing some spider stuff. And on top of that, she is a genuine badass who keeps that thing on her. All my homies love Janet. Welcome down, Ruiz. But what is a show about a superhero without the villain? So let's finally talk about them. The big bad of this season was Silvermane, played by Brendan Gleeson, and I really enjoyed him. His whole thing this season is that he wants a monopoly on power now that these enhanced individuals are starting to pop up. As for motivation goes, I really like that, as these are basically the first powered people to ever exist in universe, so I think it's a really interesting idea for someone to go along and try and collect them through very nefarious means, obviously. It's a very simple concept, but entirely elevated through Gleeson's performance, as he is so good in this show. Every time he's on screen, he's got a very charming presence to him, but still manages to feel intimidating. Whenever he walks into a room, the entire atmosphere changes. That's real aura right there. It's just nice to see different Spider-Man villains make it into live action as well. Even if they did just make him Irish for Gleeson, I enjoy seeing new characters finally pop up in live action. Spider-Man has such a deep rogues gallery, and I'm glad this show is pulling from it. We also get the live action return of the Sandman in this show, and he's definitely my favorite villain of the bunch. First off, I love how his powers start out by having him look like living sandpaper. It is such a cool effect, and even better as the show progresses, seeing him become more and more sand-like. But secondly, in the main continuity, I would say that the Sandman is defined by the tragedy surrounding his character, and this show does a lot with that. He very much so is the emotional weight of the show on the villain side of things, trapped in this cycle of bad mistakes and looking for a break he's never afforded. Seeing him caught up in this bad situation and hating himself because of it is really compelling, especially with how it affects his relationship with Cat Hardy. The amount of times he fumbled her should be insulting. If you're not gonna shoot past the ball, man. But I do really like their dynamic together, as they almost have this Romeo and Juliet-esque romance. Forbidden from being together, yet still trying to make it work under Silvermane's rule, and then Cat getting feelings for Ben along the way. He gets to play the very jealous corner of that love triangle, and I think it's interesting how it influences his decisions. Like how he tries to convince Tombstone to become a villain, because yeah, Tombstone's in this show. He's got a very different design for this era, as it's more scaly, but I don't really mind it too much. What's really great about Lonnie in this show is his dynamic with Robbie, as Robbie is very much so trying to help him and pull him back to the light side, while the Sandman is acting as a bad influence on this shoulder, reminding him how the world looks at him. That is a really great push and pull we see him in through this series. But honestly, when it comes to Tombstone, I wish we got more of him. He's a really interesting character struggling with this moral dilemma, and I think you could have done more to play that out and let him feel more impactful in the series, because he's kind of just there as one of Silvermane's goons when he's not interacting with Robbie. He's definitely a good character, you just could have done a lot more with him. Then rounding out this group is not Electro, but Megawatt. As for his characterization, he is such an annoying little shit, and I love it. Seeing him as this powerless guy who finally comes into power and just has fun with it is a joy to watch on screen. This is someone who clearly loves the sound of his own voice and makes the most of every single second of screen time. If there's anyone on this godforsaken planet who can rival my ability to yap, it's absolutely him. I've not seen a trash talker like this in years. He's really just there to be a cartoonishly evil villain with a flair for the dramatic, but for this kind of show, it really works and he serves his role well. I also really like how they use his powers in this show, as he's constantly electrifying things to create new weapons to use. He's got such a great presence on screen as one of those guys you love to hate. It just kind of dawned on me how weird it is that I'm talking about a Spider-Noir show where Megawatt is a villain in it and he's really entertaining, and the entire thing is great. There's no world where any of that should work, but I am so grateful that it does, because I loved Spider-Noir. Hopefully, if Sony is smart enough, we're gonna get more shows like this in the future. Not just for this character, although I would love season 2, but keep doing this with other Spider people. Give me a Spider-Man 2099 movie where they're gonna be able to go all out with the budget and show us visuals as good as this, but in the future. Or imagine a web-slinger series set in the Wild West with the same quality of production design. Or my personal choice, a Spider-Gwen show. And I'm not just saying that because Marvel refuses to do anything with Kate Bishop. I'm saying it because I love that first run of Spider-Gwen comics, and think it would be a really great way to explore her universe and see how different it is from our own. Earth 65 is a really interesting universe, and seeing Spider-Gwen there is her at her best, because she's able to do things on her own and form her own unique identity, instead of just being shoved into other stories she doesn't belong until she dies. You can even make it animated, I don't care, just keep doing stuff with these characters. There is limitless potential to keep making shows and movies like this, and I am begging Sony to take up that opportunity and not fall back on making them for the sake of it. Learn your goddamn lesson already and keep hiring creatives with inspired visions to make good stuff for you. It's the most obvious thing in the world, and if this slap in the face doesn't wake you up, I don't know what will. And this is coming from somebody who was completely indifferent to Spider-Noir when the series was announced, now sitting here telling you that it's great and one of the most interesting superhero shows of all time. You have struck gold using Spider-Man in this capacity, so please keep digging. And you know what? To inspire you to do better, I'm gonna keep talking like this until you announce season 2. I don't care how long it takes. This I can't do this with a straight face. Just do better, please. That's all I'm asking. You know what, Sony? Here's something for real. If you can maintain this kind of quality, I'll be the first subscriber to MGM Plus. How's that sound for a deal, huh? You might actually make a profit on that thing. While we wait to see what they've got up next, why don't you just let me know what you thought about Spider-Noir? I would genuinely love to hear what everyone has to say and continue the conversation down below. And while you're at it, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you don't do it, you're going to be visited by Man-Spider at exactly 3:04 a.m. tonight. The only way you can stop this is by subscribing. Have fun!